10. Judy Naylor. 39-year-old bookkeeper Judy Naylor wrote thousands of dollars worth of company checks to herself while her boss, Craig Hartman, was out of town in 2004. After realizing he would catch on to the theft, she and her husband, Donald Lee MacPhail, tried to shoot Hartman. He survived though, and police charged Naylor and MacPhail with attempted murder after tracking them down at a motel in Robeson County, North Carolina. By then, Naylor had a troubling history of stealing to support her drug habit. A year earlier, her own mother had accused her of stealing $7,000 worth of jewelry from her stepfather, James Croxton, but ultimately the family dropped the case. Naylor and MacPhail were charged with first-degree attempted murder. Unable to afford her $4,500 bail, Judy languished in jail for the next year while awaiting trial. During that time, her mother passed away and Croxton began suffering from Alzheimer's disease. Knowing her stepfather had received a $43,000 insurance payout after her mother's death, Judy convinced Croxton to bail her out of jail and to let her live with him while her case played out. 6 months later, she dialed 911 and reported finding Croxton unresponsive in his bed. Paramedics quickly determined that the 62-year-old was dead and that it appeared to be from natural causes, but they hadn't even left the scene when Judy's stepmother called authorities and warned them that she believed Judy was responsible for Croxton's death. Donna Naylor told investigators how her stepdaughter had taken advantage of Croxton and even accused her of being intimate with her stepfather as part of her manipulation strategy. An autopsy later revealed a deadly amount of chloroform in Croxton's system, and 2 of Judy's family members claimed that she'd even talked about murdering Croxton, although they apparently hadn't taken her seriously enough to warn anyone. Detectives didn't have to look far to figure out where the chloroform had come from, since it was paid for with one of Croxton's credit cards. They also discovered that his will had recently been amended to leave his entire estate to Judy. In the end, she was found guilty of murder and is now serving a life sentence behind bars. 9. Nathan Matthews. When Becky Watts vanished from her home in Bristol, England in 2015, investigators were immediately interested in questioning her stepbrother, 28-year-old Nathan Matthews, and his 21-year-old girlfriend Shauna Hoare, who were both at the house when she disappeared. The couple claimed that they heard the door slam on Becky's way out, but they had no idea where she went. Nearly 2 weeks later, authorities found Becky's dismembered remains in a shed belonging to a couple who were friends with Nathan and Shauna. Carl Demetrius and Jadine Parsons said that the pair had offered them money to store the suitcase containing Becky's saran-wrapped body parts, but insisted they were unaware of what was inside the luggage. By then, the evidence against Nathan and Shauna had begun to pile up. Nathan's fingerprint was found in some blood on Becky's doorway, and surveillance footage showed him buying a circular saw after his stepsister went missing. Both he and Shauna were seen buying cleaning supplies, and DNA evidence linked them to items that were found in the shed with Becky's remains. Nathan eventually confessed to killing Becky and insisted Shauna wasn't involved in any way, but authorities charged them both in connection with the case. Prosecutors accused the pair of playing Monopoly and ordering takeout on the evening of the murder, and keeping Becky's corpse at their home for the next 3 days before passing it off to their friends. The suspects carried on with their lives like nothing had happened, while Nathan's family frantically searched for Becky. Nathan later claimed that he didn't tell the family that something had happened to his stepsister because he didn't want to take away their hope that she was still alive. He was convicted of murder and sentenced to life with a minimum of 33 years. Shauna was found guilty of the lesser charge of manslaughter and received a 17-year sentence. Carl Demetrius and Jadine Parsons pleaded guilty to assisting an offender, earning Demetrius a 2-year sentence. Parsons, however, only received a 16-month term. 8. Paul Edward Jinkerson Jr. During a fishing trip to Missouri's Big River one day in 2017, a family discovered the dead body of 51-year-old self-proclaimed Ku Klux Klan leader Frank Ancona Jr., who had been reported missing a few days earlier when he stopped showing up for work. The man had apparently been shot in the head multiple times. Investigators located Ancona's abandoned vehicle about 30 miles from where his body was found, with evidence of a burn pile nearby. Inside his home, police found his safe ransacked and several of his guns missing. Given his association with the notorious hate group, it would be natural to assume that he had a lot of enemies, or at least people who despised him for his beliefs and might want him dead. It was also possible that a member of a rival KKK faction wanted to wipe out their competition. But evidence found in Ancona's home and certain details of his disappearance that didn't add up led detectives to point the finger at his wife Melissa and his 24-year-old stepson Paul Edward Jinkerson Jr. As it turned out, his death had nothing to do with his controversial club membership and everything to do with his personal life. After initially putting the murder on her son, Melissa claimed that Jinkerson had no involvement in the crime and that she was under the influence when she made her initial statement implicating him in the shooting. She reportedly killed Frank because he had asked her for a divorce. Melissa Ancona pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and received a life sentence with the possibility of parole, while Jinkerson was sentenced to 59 years in prison for first-degree intentional homicide, armed criminal action, and abandonment of a corpse. 7. Jenna Oakley. Single mom and empty nester Rhonda Oakley found a second chance at love when she met and married her husband Philip in 2016. She moved into his home in Danville, Kentucky, and welcomed his teenage son and daughter into her life with open arms. Later that year, the 52-year-old stepson arrived home to find Rhonda's deceased body. There was no evidence of forced entry into the residence, but Rhonda's car was missing and her stepdaughter Jenna was nowhere to be found. Philip told police that he and Rhonda disapproved of Jenna's relationship with an older man named Kenneth Nye, who lived out of state. They tried everything they could to stop the two from talking, including taking Jenna's phone away and threatening Nye with legal action if he didn't back off. Jenna finally agreed to follow the rules and Nye promised to leave her alone, only for Philip to now wonder if the pair had continued talking all along. He also suspected his wife's death was part of a sinister plot for the young couple to stay together at all costs. Jenna's journal entries soon confirmed Philip's fears about the relationship continuing without his knowledge, and that she'd also planned to kill him. Other evidence revealed that Nye flew into Kentucky and took an Uber to the Oakley's house the day before Rhonda's murder, while Philip was conveniently out of town on business. Surveillance footage from after the murder showed Jenna and Nye exiting a store and leaving in Rhonda's car. And according to some reports, neither of them seemed worried or upset. Investigators tracked the fugitive couple to a motel in Tucumcari, New Mexico, where they were found sleeping in Rhonda's vehicle. They were charged with murder, but Nye took his own life in his prison cell before he could face trial. He left behind a detailed confession, taking full responsibility for the crime. But Jenna admitted to fatally stabbing Rhonda to death after she and Kenneth choked her to the point of losing consciousness. Jenna pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter and theft and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. She'll be eligible for parole in 2034, but she won't find a warm welcome with Philip, who's disowned his daughter and wants nothing to do with her after killing the woman he loved. 6. Wesley Hansel. 18-year-old college student A.J. Hansel was folding laundry while spending spring break in her family's home in Norfolk, Virginia in 2015, when, out of the blue, she was kidnapped from the home. Her family discovered laundry strewn all over the room with the radio playing, but there was no sign of A.J. About a month later, her body was found near the North Carolina border, roughly 50 miles from where she vanished. Given the bruising on her face and body, the extremely high amount of heroin in her system, and her complete lack of a history of drug use, led authorities to theorize that someone forcefully caused her to overdose. By then, investigators had already become suspicious of AJ's stepfather, Wesley, who had recently been kicked out of the family home for his drug use and bizarre behavior. In fact, they discovered the young woman's body by following the GPS movements of Wesley's work vehicle. DNA evidence indicated that AJ had been in the van, and surveillance footage put Wesley near the area where her body was dumped. Police also found heroin in his motel room along with a shovel in his vehicle. Authorities finally charged Wesley with murder 3 years after AJ's death. The defense argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that AJ took her own life, but jurors ultimately agreed with the prosecution's stance that there were far too many coincidences for Wesley to be innocent. In the end, he was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. 5. Williams Blankenship and Lane Wutan. In what authorities would later describe as a drug deal gone wrong, 24-year-old Josh Fowler was at home with his stepfather in Bexar County, Texas one day in 2020 when they heard a car pull up outside. They exited the house to find 23-year-old Lane Wutan, his mother 46-year-old Jennifer Blankenship, and his stepfather 59-year-old Williams Blankenship standing in the backyard. Wutan was armed with an AR-15, and the Blankenships each had a handgun, and Williams held 2 clubs. As Fowler tried to wrestle the AR-15 away from Wutan, Williams handed his stepson one of his clubs in his possession. Fowler's stepdad later told police that he heard 2 gunshots right before his stepson collapsed to the ground and began screaming in agony. Jennifer Blankenship allegedly told the stepfather that he'd end up dead if he called the police, and then the suspects fled the scene. Fowler died from his injuries despite doctors' best efforts to save him. The Lone Star Fugitive Task Force tracked Wutan and the Blankenships down at a motel and charged them with first-degree murder. Lane Wutan and Williams Blankenship were tried together and found guilty of murder. The judge sentenced Wutan to 22 years in prison and handed down a 10-year sentence to Blankenship. Jennifer, who chose to have her case tried separately, pleaded guilty to manslaughter and received 20 years behind bars. 4. Todd Jackson and Amberlynn Nichols. Relatives of 33-year-old Raymond Mark Klein and his 37-year-old wife, Crystal, became concerned when they stopped hearing from the couple in early 2020. At the same time, Raymond's metal scrapping activity stopped, even though that was how he made a living. Family members filed missing persons reports with the Polk County, Florida Sheriff's Office, but there were no immediate breaks in the case. A few weeks later, tipsters told police that the couple's roommate, a 19-year-old woman named Amberlynn Nicole Nichols, was trying to sell the couple's truck for $200. According to reports, Nichols told some people that the truck's owner had been shot in the head and that she needed to get rid of the vehicle. Another witness accused Nichols' stepfather, 34-year-old Todd Michael Jackson, of shooting the couple in their bed as they slept. Authorities confronted the couple's roommate, who allegedly confessed to her role in the crime, and corroborated the other witnesses' claims about Jackson killing Raymond and Crystal. Witness statements revealed that Jackson removed an air conditioner and pushed the bodies out of the window and onto the lawn. Using a dolly, he wheeled the corpses into a swamp behind the house with the help from Nichols' boyfriend, Larry James Waters Jr. Nichols led investigators to the bodies, and it was clear that the clients had been dead for some time, although the level of decomposition made it difficult to say exactly how long. An autopsy that was performed after the fact confirmed, though, that they'd both been shot. As far as motives go, Jackson reportedly claimed that Klein stole $30,000 from him and decided to get retribution by killing the victims in cold blood. The man was subsequently taken into custody from his home and was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Nichols admitted that she tried to sell the Kleins his truck, and both she and Waters admitted to knowing about the murders and failing to report them. They were each charged with being an accessory after the fact and 2 counts of failing to report a death. Nichols was also hit with an additional charge of dealing in stolen property. For the time being, all 3 suspects remain behind bars without bail. 3. Valeria Smith. 54-year-old Jacqueline Smith was stabbed to death in her car on the streets of Baltimore in 2018. Her husband, Keith, and her 28-year-old stepdaughter, Valeria, told police that a young woman had approached the vehicle with a baby in her arms, asking for spare change. Then, just moments later, a man rushed up and grabbed Jacqueline's purse before plunging a knife into her chest. Afterward, the attacker fled the scene. The horrifying story sparked widespread fear and outrage, even causing Oprah Winfrey to say that she'd think twice before giving money to panhandlers in the future. But homicide investigators were unconvinced by the story Keith and Valeria told them, and as they dug deeper into the case, they found evidence that Jacqueline's husband and stepdaughter knew more than they were letting on, possibly as a way to cover up their involvement. Surveillance footage from the alleged crime scene showed no signs of the Smiths' car being in the area at the time of the murder, although it was seen parked somewhere else for a 15-minute period. Detectives also learned that Keith had asked a friend to help him kill Jacqueline, and that he conducted a Google search about countries Americans can travel to without a passport. Several months after the crime, Keith and Valeria were nabbed just 20 miles from the Mexican border in southern Texas. Keith was convicted of murder and received a life sentence, while Valeria pleaded guilty to acting as an accessory after the fact and was ordered to serve 5 years in prison. 2. Ronnie Rainey. In May of 2013, 911 dispatchers in Prince George's County, Maryland, received a call from a man claiming that he'd killed 2 of his family members and was planning to turn the gun on himself. He said he did it because his wife took everything away from him. Police arrived at the home of 59-year-old Ronnie Rainey to find him barricaded inside. Thankfully, though, they managed to safely coax the former Army medic outside. But inside the house, officers found Ronnie's wife, 50-year-old Army veteran Lisa Rainey, and his stepdaughter, 27-year-old Arielle Chantry Shelton, dead from gunshot wounds. Ronnie had also attempted to shoot his son, but the bullet narrowly missed his head and shot through the brim of his baseball cap. Prosecutors argued that the shooter planned his family's execution in advance because his marriage to Lisa was falling apart and he couldn't bear the thought of her moving on with her life. There was no documented history of abuse in the household, but family members said that there were issues between the couple in the days leading up to the murders. Shortly before the incident, Lisa had called a friend and asked them to check and see if Ronnie's vehicle was at their house. She was reportedly worried about some threats he'd made. The vehicle wasn't in the driveway, so Lisa and Arielle returned home and walked inside, only to get ambushed by gunfire. As it turned out, Ronnie had parked behind the house to avoid having his truck spotted. He pleaded guilty to murder and attempted murder charges, but argued in court that he shouldn't be held criminally responsible because of his mental state at the time. A jury disagreed, and so did the judge, who pointed out that his decision to park his truck behind the house indicated that the murders were premeditated and deliberate. As a result, he was found guilty and received a life sentence. 1. Ian Anselmo. After receiving a call one afternoon in 2019 from an obviously disturbed young man who claimed that he'd killed his stepmother, police arrived at a cemetery in Eustis, Florida, to find 39-year-old pregnant mother of 6 Sue Ellen Anselmo unconscious and bleeding in her SUV. Upon further investigation, they discovered that a cord had been wrapped around her neck. Sitting in the passenger seat was her 21-year-old stepson Ian Anselmo. Sue Ellen was rushed to the hospital, where she later succumbed to her injuries, and Ian was charged with murder and killing an unborn child. He pleaded not guilty and was freed on 10% of a $75,000 bond pending his trial. While authorities declined to speculate on a possible motive, a charging document stated that Ian was difficult to understand in the 911 call. However, he'd mentioned getting into an argument with the woman. Ian's father, 41-year-old John Anselmo, told the South Florida Sun-Sentinel that the family was racking their brains trying to find out what happened because, in his own words, the whole thing seemed so weird to him. But despite his son's possible involvement in Sue Ellen's death, he helped post Ian's bond. Court documents revealed that Sue Ellen had hired a divorce lawyer the day before she was killed. According to a hospital petition that put the victim's mother in charge of her health decisions when she was still clinging to life, she and her kids had recently moved out of the home she shared with John out of fear for their own safety. John Anselmo said that the couple had separated about a week earlier after 13 years of marriage, but that he expected them to reconcile. It remains unclear whether their problems played any role in Sue Ellen's death. In late 2021, court filings revealed that Ian Anselmo plans to rely on an insanity defense in court, but at the moment, the case appears to be ongoing. Would you rather date the single parent of a rebellious teenager who clearly disapproves of the relationship, or be with someone whose children adore you but face constant drama from the other parent? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.